This version of the podcast is mixed in mono, but if you would like to listen in 5.1 surround sound, please visit ufocast.co.uk/prisoner for more details.
This is episode 6, but we recorded it 12th, back in June 2022.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of By Hook or By Crook, our prisoner podcast with me, Luke, and my co-host...
Me, Michael from the Tin Dog Podcast. Or just Michael. I'm some bloke. Yeah, that's fine. But we have a guest number 3.
We do have a guest number 3, and it is, for those in the Doctor Who world, you'll know him very well, Steve Hatcher, runner of the Hoovers and the Hooverville Convention. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much, Luke. Hello, Michael, as well. Good to see you again, both of you.
It is. I haven't seen you forever.
Long time. Well, we've been COVIDed, haven't we? In the meantime, did either of you catch it?
Yes.
Oh God, yeah. I was a very early adopter.
I didn't get it at all. My wife and my daughter both got it in the house, and I was touching the same door handles and the same cutlery. And I think I must have some strange Gallifreyan. Yes, stop me. Yes.
No, my wife and I went to see Time Fracture at the beginning of April.
Oh, okay.
And probably more likely the train than actually Time Fracture itself was where we probably caught it. But recovered now.
Good.
But yes, and well, actually for me, it's been longer, I think, because small children have got in the way of me coming to Hooverville. I haven't been to Hooverville for a number of years. So.
I think the last time I saw you, Luke, was when I relieved you of a DVD shelf when I was down in Warwick at my auntie's funeral.
I had forgotten.
Let's combine two. It's a very sad occasion, but I made something out of it.
You did, yes, because I now live in the same part of the world that Steve grew up in. So before we got on, we were just reminiscing. Well, not reminiscing. Steve was telling me about his old school, and I've been in it, though it's no longer a school. But yes, so we've asked various people to join us on this show. Would it be true to say, Steve, that you're not specifically a fan of The Prisoner per se, but more of a connoisseur of archive TV in general, and The Prisoner is one of those shows that you have watched?
Yeah, but probably. I mean, I absolutely love The Prisoner. I think it's a great show. And I remember it on first broadcast, which neither you two do. I know that much.
No, not at all.
But I used to... I mean, although I suppose I'm mainly known for my involvement with Doctor Who things, Doctor Who fan things, I very rarely watched Doctor Who in the 60s because Saturday night used to go to my granddad's house, and my granddad would never have Doctor Who on. Well, it wasn't that he wouldn't have Doctor Who on, he would never have the BBC on. He'd got the strange thing against the BBC. I don't know, we would never have it. So I grew up very much with the ITC shows, with The Saint, with Randall and Hopkirk, and before The Prisoner with Danger Man, and then with The Prisoner. So absolutely remember that on first broadcast, and remember how much I enjoyed it and how absolutely infuriated I was by the ending. Although now I love it, but at the time, very infuriated.
And what was it as a kid watching it that attracted you to the show?
Well, first of all, it was Further Adventures of John Drake. Ooh, was it, though? Yes, I think he probably was. Yeah. He certainly looked and sounded like him. So it was that. That was nice because I'd enjoyed Danger Man. Of course, we were watching it in black and white because, like the vast majority of the rest of the country, we hadn't got colour television. It was 67, was it? Prisoner was on?
End of 67, beginning of 68 was the broadcast.
There was no colour television in this country, was there?
No.
Experimental tennis broadcasts or something.
Yeah.
So, in black and white. Wouldn't it lose an awful lot being in black and white, I think? But
well, this is the thing. Do you remember the black and white, or has the repeats in colour kind of erased that kind of experience from your head?
I don't know. To be fair, I don't know. I was born in 1958, so I'd have been 9 when I watched it. But I do remember that when television was black and white, and for me, television was black and white really until actually the early 80s. Was the first time
Me too.
first time I got a colour television. But you could sort of tell, or you could convince yourself that you could tell what colour things were, even though they're in black and white. Oh, that particular shade of grey must be red, and that particular shade is yellow. And I'm sure it was nonsense, but it's right, isn't it, Michael? You sort of got into that. I mean, is it just me, or is it?
No, you're completely right. Yeah,
I think I've sent this to you this week, Michael. On a slight Doctor Who aside, I had identified my only classic Doctor Who memory as occurring in Time and the Rani, and I would have been 3 at the time.
The Rani, oh.
I know.
But more recently, I've actually thought it's probably not that, because A, my memory is in focus, and B, my memory is in colour. And we didn't get a colour TV until January 1989. And I didn't get glasses until October 1989. So I now think my first memory of Doctor Who is probably Survival, which is a slightly more auspicious story. So yeah, so for all of us,
but I haven't really answered your question.
Yes, you haven't answered your question. Yeah.
There's all sorts of reasons why I like it. I mean, it is mysterious and strange and weird and wonderful, and the look of the village was like nothing, was it? There was nothing else on television like The Prisoner in 1967, which actually was slightly frustrating, because I did really want it to be more like Danger Man, and The Saint, which I think was probably my favourite. What was The Saint my favourite ITC show, or was it Randall and Hopkirk? It was, or maybe even The Champions, but I did love Robin Hood as well, The Adventures of Robin Hood.
Were you also into all the Super Mario Nation shows from Jerry Anderson?
Very, very much so. Very much so. I was bought. I was about to say I bought, but I was bought and subscribed to a copy of the first issue of TV 21 when it came out.
Wow.
I mean, my first favourite TV show was Supercar. Which, what was that, 1961 was Supercar, so I would have been 3 then, so I suspect I saw it on repeat a year or 2 later. But that's Supercar, and then Fireball, and then Stingray, and then Thunderbirds, and then Captain Scarlet, which to my mind is still the best of the lot. And then came Joe 90, and well, never mind then.
I just re-embarked on a Joe 90 rewatch. I love Joe 90, but never mind.
It's fun.
I understand it's not everybody's cup of tea.
But no, if you're a kid, because kids don't enjoy watching kids. Kids enjoy watching these heroes driving fantastic cars.
Well, so my theory is, when Joe 90 was repeated, I was 10, and I was a specky 10-year-old. And so for me, Joe 90 was me having adventures. I think that's probably... Okay.
But Joe 90 is nothing. Joe 90 is nothing more than a tale of child abuse, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is. It's
we've covered this one. It's a bit scary.
It's actually horrific when you think about it.
It's the tale of. It's not just child abuse. It's child soldiers and mind control.
Yeah, it is.
Absolutely.
It is.
Absolutely.
If you were to make it these days, it would be a very different show.
You wouldn't be allowed to make it these days, would you?
It would be a. It would have
it's Dollhouse. Dollhouse.
Yeah,
is
that's
the sort of,
very true.
Yes. Anyway. We have rambled far from the point.
There's one more ramble I need to ask Steve.
Okay, right, go ahead.
Because he's the only number 3 we've had on who remembers or has even watched the previous show. The show that, he isn't John Drake. Whatever you want to call it. Super Secret Agent.
Danger Man.
Have you forgot we had my dad on?
Oh, we had your dad on, of course.
Except for the listeners, we haven't had my dad on yet, because my dad is episode 13. So
No, but it was more a case of what was it about Danger Man that made it unlike the other shows?
Well, it was exciting, and it was that's a very good question. I mean, it was James Bond for the whole family, wasn't it? It was, in fact, wasn't it supposed to be James Bond originally? And Ian Fleming was involved in the original discussions about Danger Man, and then it couldn't be James Bond, and Patrick McGowan was asked to play James Bond, but wouldn't, because he wouldn't do the kissing. So there was all that sort of thing going on. But basically, it was exciting, well-told stories. Which is true of so many of those ITC shows. And the more I've gone back and looked at some of those ITC shows, both the later ones and the earlier ones, things like Interpol Calling and The Sentimental Agent and Man of the World and things like that. They're all just cracking good adventure tales and good stuff. And yes, there's a fair bit of repetition and a fair bit of formulaic television and so on, but they weren't made to watch the whole lot in a week. But they're good stuff. They're good stuff.
Fair enough.
Cool.
Fair enough.
And so that's your beginnings with it. What has made you return to The Prisoner over the years, and why do you still enjoy it now?
Well, I saw it. I mean, it was repeated, wasn't it? The Prisoner. It was not something that ever really went away. It cropped up every so often. But I do remember the Channel 4. Channel 4 was it repeats in the early 90s, but it had been repeated before then. I'm sure 80s. I don't know, but so it never really gone away. McGowan was just a great actor and a great leading man. I mean, what charisma and what. I bet he was a horrible person to know from all accounts. Everything you hear about him, he would have been a right git to know. To have, can you imagine having him as a friend, or a neighbour? But what an actor, and so many good things he was in. But it was still that mystery about it, and still that what we were watching. Were we watching? Well, obviously it was a containment facility for agents, but who was running it? Was it, in quotes, our side running it, or was it, in quotes, the other side running it? We never find that out, of course. That mystery is kept going all the way through. But the answer to the mystery is given in the opening credits. I mean, those wonderful opening credits. I think there's 2 shows that I can think of. There's probably others where the opening credits are an episode in their own right. I mean, people say, do you remember the episode of The Prisoner where he gets kidnapped by those blokes dressed as undertakers? Yeah, that was every episode. And they also say, do you remember that episode of Survivors where the Chinese scientist takes the disease around the world? Yeah, that was every episode. So you got that, and those wonderful scenes of McGowan striding through the corridors to his boss's office and then silently shouting at him for a bit and banging the papers down on the desk. And then he goes off in his little car and back to his little flat and packs a bag. And next thing we know, he wakes up in Portmeirion. And honestly, Rover, isn't that fantastic? I'm sorry, I'm rambling now, but there's so many aspects of it that are great. Yeah.
I've said this before.
Well, there's so many. Well, all he needed to do was, instead of heading towards the sea, go the other way and just keep working until you reach the train and get out that way, because it's clearly Portmeirion. But anyway, never mind.
Well, I mean, we've had some interesting theories about the village over the weeks that we've been recording these episodes, which listeners will. Some of those are in the future for our listeners. Some of those are in the past. I suppose the big question before we get into the episode specifically is, on what level do you interpret The Prisoner? Do you kind of see it do you see it more literally or more allegorical?
I think McGowan didn't know which it was, to be honest. Right. I think McGowan seemed to change his mind as he went through it. And I, in all honesty, I think the final episodes where it turned out you are number 6, I think he made that up as he went along. I really do. I think, I mean, it got extended, didn't it? Halfway through, it was going to be so long, and then it had to be a bit longer. So, bloody hell, we better think of an ending for it. Can't think of one. Let's just do that. Let's just put funny animal masks on, and then it can be me all along. And I think McGowan's mental health was not in the greatest of places by the end of it as well. I think he had a hard time of it, as did everybody who had to work with him. Yeah. But no, I tend to take it more. I mean, this was the Cold War, for heaven's sake, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Now, my politics are perhaps at a little angle to what a lot of people's would be, because I saw the Cold War from the other side, to be honest. That, you know, my dad had been a member of the Communist Party, and then when I grew up and got old, I became a member of the Communist Party as well. So I know which side I was on in those days, and it wasn't Nixon, and it wasn't and it wasn't Harold Wilson or Macmillan or so on, or Heath and so on. No, it's like I was on the other side. So
that explains the whole BBC not watching the BBC version. Because in my life, I've come across lots of families every so often who you weren't allowed to watch ITV, you weren't allowed to watch the commercials, but you were allowed to watch, what some people would class as the government censored BBC. So you are the first person I've come across who it was the other way around for. It
really isn't that. No, because my granddad, this was at my granddad's house. At our house, we watched both. We absolutely watched both.
Okay.
And my dad never, ever tried to impose anything on me, or never, ever. I mean, yes, he educated me and taught me right from wrong and left from right. And I knew whose side I was on. But no, he didn't try and do that. This was my granddad. Now, my granddad, my granddad was a great man. He was a smashing man. Really liked him. Really loved him. Top man. He was a man who people respected. And he was a very law-abiding man. So there is absolutely no way he would have refused to pay his TV license.
Oh, no, I didn't think that.
No. He wouldn't have refused to pay his TV license. My theory is that because he so resented paying the TV license, somewhere in the back of his mind was, well, if I never watch the BBC, at least I shall be justified in complaining about it, which is a bit twisted. I mean, there's that, but I think there's also maybe a little bit of inverted snobbery that the BBC is too posh and it's not for the likes of us. So we can watch the common stuff. We can watch Huey Green and Michael Miles and wrestling. He loved the wrestling. He absolutely adored the wrestling on Saturday evening. He would sit in his armchair, pressed right up against the television, and he would be slapping the arms of the armchair and cheering for Jackie Pallow or Mick McManus or whoever, and it was quite embarrassing, really. But never mind.
So does that mean that in this scenario, regardless of who's running the village, are you not actually on McGowan's side because he's a member of the British establishment?
Well, I don't know, because I think the village is being run by the British Secret Service. Right. And I think McGowan resigns at the beginning because he's been asked to do things that basically he knows are wrong. I think John Drake has come to the conclusion, having met so many Russian spies and agents of the German Democratic Republic and all that over the years, that actually these are good people, and that we shouldn't be getting into this dangerous game of Cold War with these people. We should find a way to live peaceably together, and that's what it says on the thing he slaps down on the desk there.
So that's why McKern is right when he's saying it doesn't really matter who runs the village, because basically it's always the people in charge, regardless of what side.
Well, I think it's McGowan's side. I think it's the British Secret Service who are running it, because he knows too much, so he has to be.
No, the argument for that, for me, was made a few weeks ago when somebody happened to point out that all of the sockets in the village are English power sockets.
Well, they're probably Welsh, actually, but
still 3 pins.
As I learned recently, but I suppose this is a holdover from Empire. I was in the Middle East, and they all have British plug sockets. So I didn't.
Oh well, in that case, right. Well, that's my argument completely.
No. I think
it still works. That's a good point. Still works.
So let's dive into the general now.
But there was there was an episode of Danger Man, of course, where the Russians were operating just exactly that sort of operation. Right. They'd got basically the village. I can't remember.
But that was based on a real Scottish village that was used by the British government that they'd heard about. So even then, that's all full circle business. But like you said, we're here to discuss the general.
We are here to discuss the general, and so most of our guests thus far have picked an episode, whereas you, Steve, just said just pick me one. As long as it's not the one where he turns into Nigel Stock.
Although I love Nigel Stock, he's a great actor, but it hadn't got McGowan much in it, had it?
Which is fine, because my dad loves that episode, and we had him on a while back to talk about that. And listeners, obviously, you will hear that in about 7 weeks' time.
Nigel Stock was one of my favourite actors, but
he's great. I love Nigel Stock.
He was great.
So, and the reason I asked you to do the general of the ones that we have left to record is because, in part, it's about teaching. and pedagogy, I think is the fancy term.
You can't be arrested for it.
And you,
Not anymore.
And you were a teacher for most, if not all, of your career, I believe.
Oh yeah. For over 30 years a teacher. There I was, spreading Marxism-Leninism in the ears of our youth.
And teaching
by the medium of French.
Teaching French, and was it just French, or did you do other languages?
My degree is French and Italian.
Right.
So I taught all sorts of languages at different times, because if you can teach one language, you can teach pretty much any. So I did Spanish, I did German, and a bit of Russian at different times. So.
Хорошо, Steve.
Очень хорошо.
So anyway, so the prisoner.
Forgotten you speak Russian. I'd forgotten.
Yeah,
that.
well, yeah. I mean, it's very rusty. I did Joe 90 tangent. There's a sign in the first episode of Joe 90 in Russian, but they've clearly copied it from a dictionary because it has all the stress marks that show Westerners how to pronounce the word, but you wouldn't see that on a printed sign. Anyway,
absolutely not. No, my Russian is minimal. Sorry, we keep going on to going off on tangerines are a different sort of orange.
It's fine. I believe that if people have stuck with us until this point in the show, they will have had to tolerate our asides. So the general is about this, essentially about this revolutionary new teaching technique called speed learn that the prisoner gets caught up in. And there's a professor who is writing the lectures, and then there's this mysterious general of the title that we kind of get talked about.
It's a bit obvious, that, isn't it? It's a bit obvious where that's going.
Yes, I think it probably is to our eyes now. It's not. But I don't. I suppose this is another question to ask you: how common were this kind of storyline, the computer that kind of knows everything? Was this a common trope?
I think
that has been inserted into the prisoner at this point?
I think it was. Well, you'd got the Harry Palmer film with Michael Caine, The $1 Billion Brain, which I suppose is one of the biggest examples of that, where you've got a giant computer that knows everything. Again, the Russians are using. And you mentioned Joe 90, of course. You've got Big Rat there, haven't you, as well? But
I mean, that was being made concurrently with the prisoner, so they probably weren't influencing each other. But yes,
but it was in the air, that sort of thing. If you go back to some of the short stories of people like Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov, even in the 50s, you've got the ideas of a giant computer that controls all of humanity, and I'm thinking of the Arthur C. Clarke novel The City and the Stars, one of his early ones, which is a city where a computer does it. And Star Trek, of course, as well. You've got big lizard-shaped computers and so on, haven't you? And there's a couple of Star Trek episodes where a computer is running things.
Now, the question is, I forget, because Star Trek broadcasts in the UK was slightly behind.
So
it might not, again, that might not have been shown in the UK before this. But
the point I'm making is these things. No, it started in the summer of '69 in the UK. These things were in the air, though. Yeah. It wasn't an unusual idea. The idea of we mentioned Doctor Who, of course. You've got the Crotons with the learning machine.
Yeah.
Wotan.
And Wotan, before that, of course, yes. Yeah, I mean, the one that came to mind immediately was the Crotons because of the teaching aspect of it. But yes, Wotan, absolutely. And then later you've got Boss in Doctor Who.
We're talking about potentially an idea that's been done, certainly by now it's been done to death.
Yeah.
Do we think that the prisoner handles it interestingly, particularly well? What are the things about the story that...
In all honesty, I think this is quite an average story.
Right.
I think it's okay. I don't think it's dreadful. I don't think it's wonderful. I think it's fine. It's just fine. I do wonder what they're doing with that. I mean, if they can... For one thing, I'm not quite sure what they're doing, what number two's scheme is. I mean, yes, they're teaching people all these useless historical facts, and I say that with all due respect to my history teacher, former colleagues. All those people were being taught to do was list a whole series of facts, as is demonstrated when McGowan gets asked about a battle, and instead of being asked what was the date of the battle, he's asked what was the battle, and he can't answer it, can he? He gives he just gives the date, and yeah, but I didn't ask you that. This comes back to it. So it's sort of pointless trivia. I wouldn't mind it for the next time I'm on a TV quiz show or something.
That's exactly my argument for why this is a good thing.
It would be good, and I also wouldn't mind it as a modern languages teacher, because if you can bypass the dull bit of learning all the different words and go directly to how the words work with each other and how you actually use those words to make sentences to put over ideas and all the rest of it, then you've bypassed the dull bit. But I'm still not quite sure what the bad guys were doing. I mean, presumably there's some sort of mind control aspect involved, but I don't think that's really made very explicit as to what they're aiming for.
You have the line at the end about and what have you got, and he says a row of cabbages, and number 2 says knowledgeable cabbages. So for me, I get the sense that it's about producing, there's a similarity again with a computer brain in The Mind Robber, where the doctor's like, you're going to turn the population of Earth into sausages. So there's a sense of it's not necessarily about brainwashing people into doing something particularly, but you're conforming them to a particular,
keeping them docile
idea. Well, or I mean, I suppose I feel it's maybe pertinent to today. And I think the three of us would probably all agree that we're not a fan of the current government's education policy. But there's a sort of idea of kind of learning a particular view of the British past, right?
Yes.
And if you can control where's that phrase come from? He who controls the past controls the present.
It's from 1984.
Yeah.
There you go. So I think.
Yeah, but Orwell was a git as well. So.
So I think that's what it's going for. It's about saying we want to produce an education system that produces identical citizens who all think the same way.
This awful concept of British values that every school in the country has to teach, as if no other country and no other culture has values, and as if there is such a thing as British values that everybody in this country shares, and that there's not different cultures and different ways of looking at the world. Absolutely appalling. But there we are. Schools meekly go along with that because they have to.
Yes. My daughter now knows the national anthem as a result of the Jubilee,
including the verses about Scotland.
Somebody did say something about the second verse, and I was like, really? Yes, which obviously we all know from Doctor Who. We know the second verse from Doctor Who, don't we?
No, I'm saying there's 13 verses as well.
Yeah, if you take out the second verse, then the third verse becomes the second.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Right, so my issue with the whole thing, story-wise, getting back to this, rather than the terrible plight of UK education system, which would be a entirely different podcast, and one I'd totally sign up for. It's that this combines 3 different ideas and tries to get them all to be the same thing. Because you've got the education computer aspect, which they imply is for mind control, but is actually, like Steve said, just an ideal way of cramming your head full of magic and nonsense and facts. Right? Now, obviously, it's he who controls which facts are chosen gets to be the mind control aspect. So I can see those 2 morphing into one. But then, in a spoilery kind of a way, the prisoner wins in an almost Captain Kirk Star Trek how you stop a computer kind of a way. And you're like, well, that's how you break a 1960s computer.
Yes.
It's not how you would break data. It's not how you would break anything later on. No. And most artificial intelligences, even the one from War Games, would go, that's an invalid question, next question. Yes. It wouldn't go, Deep Thought would go, well, why what?
Yes. Deep Thought would think for 10,000 years and then come up with an answer to it. Yeah. Which in fact it did, didn't it?
You almost wanted, what does the general come out with? It comes out with 42. That's,
Yes.
So it's what they've done is they've smushed them together. So the prisoner manages to beat one storyline, but the actual getting facts into your head general storyline, that's just ignored. But because you're watching this in a kind of passive viewery way, until you start taking it apart, you go, oh yeah, he's beaten the baddies, and then you go, hang on, that's different. They're not the same thing.
Well, isn't it in a sense? It's the general is the baby of the professor.
Okay.
And in blowing up the general, which inadvertently kills the professor, this is a plot line that I think is interesting. This is another aside. It's interestingly explored in the Terminator films. In that, basically, Terminator 2 sort of gives you the idea that this would always have happened, but you can change it by blowing up the computer system, which they do. And then Terminator 3 says, actually, no, by blowing up the computer system and taking out the guy who designed it, you've just postponed it.
Yeah.
So there's the question with the general is like, in killing the professor, have you destroyed this line of research entirely, or is there a blueprint somewhere? One assumes there's a blueprint somewhere, and the village can just rebuild the general again.
Well, don't you think Mrs. Professor rather knows more than she's letting on as well? I get the feeling that Mrs. Professor is the genius behind this, in fact, and that the Professor is just stuck with his head in his books and his dates from history. I mean, he's a historian. How's he going to be building a computer?
Well, yes. Well, I suppose there's the other thing. You talk about there being three. There's a fourth plot line going on, Michael.
Oh, what, number 14?
Oh, no, I wasn't number 12. No, we'll get to number 12.
Sorry, yeah, number 12.
No,
sorry.
It's the whole, like, the waxwork of the professor. And that is never explained. You have this whole sequence where he's kind of whipping off all the things and, like, oh, she's made a clay bust of the prisoner. Like, why?
And then forgotten.
And then, why is that?
But we get a big red herring there, don't we? Because they keep saying the general, and it focuses on the bust of number 6, as if to suggest that in some way he's the general.
And then you have this waxwork in the bed, which he then whacks its head in.
Yeah, which is very, very, very rude of him, really.
Very, very rude of him. Rather like Tom Baker at the end of part 2 of the Androids of Tara. Mm-hmm. Got to get the Doctor Who references in. But so I think to go back to what you were saying, Steve. Actually, you're probably right in the sense of if she's building a waxwork of the professor, are they kind of working towards a future where actually the professor himself is dispensable because they've got some kind of physical copy of him that appears on screen?
I think so.
And yet she seems to be. The number 2 says that she's doing this to keep him alive.
Yeah, but also
it's slightly contradictory.
The one subject that the general could never teach would be art, which is her area of expertise.
Interesting.
Well, you wouldn't want to waste your time teaching that, would you? And teach something useful instead.
We've just lost at least 1% of our demographic.
Well, I don't mean it. I really don't mean it.
It's all right. No, I get what you mean, though.
I don't know. It's interesting. You could teach certain aspects of art.
You could teach the history of art,
yes,
and certain bits of artistic interpretation.
Technique.
But could you teach technique though? Because it is sort of there's some of it muscle memory. That's again where we've.
I'm the least artistic person I know, so I'm not qualified to comment.
So, well, let's talk about number 12 then. John Castle. John Castle's number 12.
What have I seen him in? Because I know him from somewhere.
The only other thing that I definitely know him from is that he plays Lord Edgware in the David Suchet version of Lord Edgware Dies. And so it's a very brief part because he gets stabbed in the neck very early on.
He dies. It's not surprising. Spoilers. He dies.
He feels like one of those people that kind of you've seen in lots of places, but I clearly haven't.
I thought it was Paul Shelley at first, and then quickly realised it wasn't, and he looks nothing like him. But he has something of the same manner as Paul Shelley.
But he's one of the few. I think it's clear by the end of the episode that he's one of the few village insiders who is genuinely wanting to work with number 6. Like there's no. I don't think he's part of a plot to trap him.
I don't know.
I think you only know that he isn't a plot because he gets killed.
Yeah,
he isn't part of a. Well, nobody's a recurring character.
And McGowan saves him from the computer outing him. I mean, number 2 has clearly worked out that's
a plot line I missed.
No, not outing him in that sense. Not outing him in that sense. I don't know. But there's the kind of thing where number 2 is basically saying, take down this problem. And he clearly knows that the answer is number 12 has given the access codes to number 6, but he's getting the computer to do it before.
Yeah. But he's also giving the general very limited amount of information.
Yes.
It's like the only conclusion he could come up with is that it's like how many apples make 5. If you've only got apples, but you've only got oranges or something. It's a bigger puzzle, but you're only given the number of pieces that you can only come to that one conclusion.
Yeah. What do we think of Colin Gordon's number 2 in this episode?
He's fun, isn't he? Am I right? He's one of only 2 number 2s who appears more than once.
Yes.
Him and McKern.
Yes.
This is the episode where he says, I'm the new number 2. In the other episode, he says, I'm number 2. But often, the other episode's shown before this one.
Helpful.
Well, but also he implies that he's met number 6. He implies that he's met number 6 before. So it's difficult. But equally...
See, for me, he was just implying that he'd been number 2 for a while.
Well, yes.
Which is why he's just started drinking the milk a bit, because in the other episode, he's clearly got an ulcer. And he's drinking it all the time.
And it also, in A, B, and C, he's on his last chance. Whereas in this episode, he's much less under the thumb of number 1. But I think that's to do with the fact that this wasn't originally going to be him. And that he just got drafted.
He's also annoyed. He said, this is the most important thing that we've ever done, and they're running it like a military operation, is one of his lines, where he's talking to himself. So you can assume that that's true, that he's just annoyed that things are being run like this, when really they could be him in charge of something spectacular. Because obviously this is completely parallel with the Open University coming online as well, because that's learning through TV, and you've got that aspect. And that's why... I know everyone says that the number 2 scarf is from like one of the Oxbridge ones, but it's really similar to one of the scarves worn by the Open University official scarf thing.
I think, wasn't the Open University 69?
I think it was being sort of touted, but I don't know.
Oh, it certainly was. It was the Labour government that, when they won their second election in '66, it was pretty much from the start of that. I mean, Jenny Lee was the minister in charge of creating the Open University. It was Nyron Bevan's widow, actually, as it happens.
Oh, right.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that's maybe another influence on what was in Lewis Griefer's mind.
Because it is learning through the television.
It was in the air. It was in the air.
Yeah. Yes.
So number 12, he was important, but he's kind of important for the plot, I guess.
Yes.
That's about it, really.
Yes.
Is he?
Well,
it's important to get number 6 into the general, isn't it? I think that's just about all he does, really, other than wind him up occasionally and say this is really important. Ooh.
So there's a couple of things, because the professor himself seen as an odd character, because he's running away at the beginning. He drops his recorder, which is a nice thing, and which number 6 cleverly just hides in the sand. The build-up's nice, but when you see the professor on screen, he's almost a completely different person. So that just jars a bit for me.
This is what makes me think he's not really in charge of the whole thing. That Mrs. Professor is the brains behind the operation, and that he's just the front.
Yes.
And I'm sure we've all met these academic types who are so totally engrossed in their own subject that they can't see beyond it, which is why I don't see him as a computer expert as well as a historian.
No, I mean, I've filmed a couple of academic debates over the last couple of weeks, and there is an element of particularly if you get 2 people from different fields debating each other, they do end up talking past each other because they're not aware enough of a breadth of literature to properly engage with each other. So yes, but maybe that's just, I don't know. Are we basically highlighting kind of faults with the script writing, or are we kind of making an effort to kind of make the whole thing coherent, with its own continuity?
There's another Doctor Who name, isn't there? Written by Lewis Greifer, who was the original writer for what became Pyramids of Mars, but took his name off it, or was considered not to have done enough on it that someone else had to rewrite it. Terence rewrote it. I think
Robert Holmes had to rewrite more heavily. But credited here as Joshua Adam, and I discovered by reading his obituary the reason for that. in that Joshua and Adam are his 2 sons.
Oh, that's nice.
Aw.
So, but why he decided to be not credited under his normal name, I don't know. But that's where his pseudonym comes from.
That's interesting.
And he's one of the people that's on the documentary that came out for the 50th anniversary. In my mind, it's an archive interview with him. So it's interesting because he clearly was a writer who was more friendly with McGowan, and so had more of an idea of what was going on in his mind. And he sussed the "you are number one" thing before McGowan told him. So that's worth picking up if you haven't seen it. So I think there's an element of the writing could have sorted out some of those kinks, and possibly some of the editing as well, in that the speed with which you get from the professor running away on the beach to him being in the TV broadcast. Unless, of course, you then just go, well, that bit was pre-recorded, and therefore,
A lot of these episodes were done under high pressure, though, weren't they? And
Yes.
and the scripts were turned in very short notice, and
Yes.
were then told they were not good enough. Go away and do it again.
I'm sure a lot of this has just come because we've been watching this time and time again, and TV was meant to be a lot more disposable. So perhaps we've just kind of read too much in because that's what we're used to doing. That's what we do. We've been doing it for 15 years for me, for taking stuff apart. Well, actually, and I've been doing it since before university, taking narrative apart and reassembling it and seeing how it ticks. So that's kind of where we're coming from. But that wouldn't be the case for most people, especially just watching this. They'd be going, oh yeah, jolly adventure, off we go.
Yeah.
Here's the build-up, here's the science. Oh, that was a bit quirky, the little hand coming out and grabbing the token. All that being, oh, hang on, don't those corridors look a bit like Scaro? Oh, it's all a bit futuristic. Oh, here's the committee with their lovely glasses on, so it's all
I had that
time.
thought. I thought Dalek corridors. That was...
Yeah.
I have to ask you, Steve, as someone who was around at the time, I've read that the little device with the hand comes out was a very recognisable toy.
Oh, yeah, it was a money box.
Yes, it was, wasn't it?
I've seen them in people's houses.
Yes.
Yeah, you would put a coin on the thing, and a little hand would come out, snatch the money, and put it. It was like some of them were coffin shaped, some of them were like a crate, but they were basically a little hand coming out, grabbing it, and putting it.
You're absolutely right. I was trying to think where I'd seen that before, and you're entirely right. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. But it seems to me there's something a little different about this episode, because on the whole, prisoner episodes are 2 stories. They're either number 6 tries to escape, or their number 2 tries to break number 6 by some devious scheme.
Yes.
And I don't think this is either of those, really. I mean, number 6 isn't really putting much effort into escaping. He's offered a deal and says no.
Is something he's a witness to and eventually stops. So it's just not focused on him.
We don't know what that devious scheme is, though, do we? I mean, all those people are quite happily going away with all their newfound knowledge about 19th century history. They've not actually done them any harm. They've just filled their minds with...
But it works with history, but like you said, you could put a dictionary's worth of information into somebody's head for another language.
Yeah.
But how they access it and how they bring it out, that makes sense. But could you do it with maths? Because there's very different than... Could you teach a musical instrument? I'm just going through the curriculum, seeing what would work.
That's right. It's teaching facts.
You couldn't teach PE.
You couldn't teach a skill. No, absolutely. And yet, you see, this is the thing. This is the thing with, and going back into my teacher experience, this is the thing with Ofsted, where you'd got subjects like PE, as you say, and art, and music, which were entirely... Yeah, and absolutely skill-based, judged on exactly the same criteria as things like English and maths and science, and which are basically knowledge-based. Yes, the skills involved as well, of course there is, but they are knowledge-based as opposed to skill-based. You can't do maths without knowledge of how to do it. Yeah. If you're just given a page full of numbers, then they, like with me, they sort of swirl in front of my eyes a bit because I don't have the knowledge to be able to do maths. because I'm a linguist, and linguists can't do maths, and mathematicians can't do languages.
But it's taking the figures in front of you and turning them into extended concepts.
Yes.
So that you can manipulate the concept and then come up with the end product.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe this is just taken in the whole scheme of The Prisoner. This is just another tool in the toolbox of tools that are being. If you see the village as a playground for people to develop science unethically. So we've had A, B, and C where they're using the sort of mind control, get into your dream drug. We've had the Schizoid Man where they brainwash him into being left-handed and thinking he's somebody else. This is just another in the toolbox, and we'll see more as the series goes on of control. And so, taken on its own, maybe you're like, well, it is a little bit pointless. But taken in the whole kind of scope of the village,
it's a bit like a callback in a sort of a horrible analysis to Nazi concentration camps, where they were doing two things, weren't they? Where they were doing their main job was basically killing people on an industrial level. But while they were doing that, they took a bit of time out to carry out what they regarded whatever as scientific experiments on that captive population. Now, we would regard those scientific so-called experiments as being entirely bogus and entirely worthless. Abhorrent is a very good word. Thank you, Michael. Yeah. But it's similar to that you've got a captive population there that you can carry out experiments on while they are a captive population.
Well, you have to remember that the concentration camp is an English invention. So,
it is. Well,
if
British
you're after
anyway.
British values, there you go.
Absolutely. The Boer War, wasn't it, Michael? The Boer
Certainly
War.
was, yeah. And that was the first time we used biological weapons as well by impregnating blankets with a disease. So,
although I think there is an argument that they were also used in the American Civil War as well, by the North. There's an argument that the
human race.
Were,
why does the Doctor like us even remotely?
Well,
yes.
So I think that's.
It's all gone very, very dark.
It's all gone
very
dark.
Sorry, I did take it in a very dark.
No, that's fine.
No, it's a dark series.
Before we dive into Spot the Doctor Who actor, of which there are quite a number, do either of you have anything else to say about the episode that you really want to kind of get out from your notes?
I just want to say McGowan again, really, because even though, as I say, this is a fairly average sort of episode, I think, McGowan is great in it, because McGowan is great in everything. And I don't think McGowan ever gave a bad performance, even when he was having some sort of mental breakdown. He became a bit shoutier than he might have been on some occasions, maybe, but he was a great actor and he was a great screen presence. And so, hey for McGowan, basically. 3 cheers for him.
Michael, anything to add from your notes?
Quick glance at my notes. All I've got is, it's facts without filtration. That's what the main focus of this is, and that's what McGowan's clearly railing against, is that people wouldn't. You can teach someone history, but you can't teach someone whether Cromwell did good or bad, or even give them enough information to make a decision on what their point of view would be on it. So if you were cramming a 3-year degree into that, you're right, get the facts out of the way, but then spend the other 2 years and 364 days arguing over what the context was and the outcome, whether it was justifiable. So you still get the 3-year degree and you get to go to more parties. So that's fine.
Yeah, I suppose the thing is just...
or in my case, go to any parties.
You don't get a degree. You don't get a degree by regurgitating facts.
No.
So
this reminds me of when I did history A level, and the question was what was Bismarck's role in achieving German reunification, and I misread that question as write everything you know about Bismarck, and unsurprisingly, I didn't get quite the result I was hoping for at history A level. But there we are.
Brilliant.
No, but that's it. We've covered everything that else is written down. So, shall we ask Steve?
Shall we ask
questions?
Steve? Yes. So we've already talked about Lewis. Is it Greifer or Griefer?
I would say Greifer.
We've already talked about Lewis Greifer, who, if you were just watching the credits, you wouldn't know unless you knew that Joshua Adam was Lewis Greifer. Was indeed the original writer of the Pyramids of Mars, but and I don't know enough. I don't know whether his script has ever appeared, and how different it is. But it's different enough from what we saw on screen that Robert Holmes was then, and he were credited as Stephen Harris when it came to screen. So we've got that out of the way. We always ignore Angelo Muscat because we've covered him. As the butler. So, who else did you spot, Steve?
Well, the obvious one was Colin Gordon, who
Yes.
was in The Faceless Ones.
Yes.
Who was the boss of Heathrow Airport. Gatwick Airport. Gatwick Airport, yes. Yeah. Gatwick Airport in The Faceless Ones.
Yeah.
Of course, the name Peter Howell jumps out because one thinks, oh, Peter Howell, but it's not Peter Howell, the composer, of course.
No, but it is Peter Howell, the actor.
Yeah, Peter Howell, the actor, who was in one of my favourite series of all time, which was The Guardians. In which he played the Home Secretary who gets assassinated. But anyway, that's a different podcast as well.
That's not The Guardians as written by John Christopher, who wrote Tripods.
No, it's about a fascist government in England in the 1980s.
Complete fiction.
Absolutely, yes. How prescient was that? Yeah.
So Peter Howell, who plays the professor in this,
go on.
You didn't recognise him as a Doctor Who actor, Michael. Do you know where he appeared? It's a small but significant role.
He was probably a Gallifreyan. Somewhere. No.
He is the investigator who turns up in part 6 of The Mutants. To basically denounce the marshal and give them independence.
Who was he in this?
Right.
He was the professor.
He is the professor, right? Got you.
Yes,
okay.
and as Steve said,
the real one, not the model.
Yes, and as Steve said, not to be confused with Peter Howell, the composer who rescored the Doctor Who theme tune and wrote lots of music for it in the 80s.
We don't confuse Ian Fleming with another Ian Fleming of the same name either, who also wasn't in Doctor
Who. Indeed, no. Anybody else, Steve?
I've got one, but it's by accident.
Right.
So
okay.
I'm not even going to take responsibility. So,
okay.
Steve, have you got any more?
Steve first, yeah.
Keith Pyatt.
Yes.
Who is a name is familiar to me as someone who's been in Doctor Who, but I couldn't tell you what he was in Doctor Who.
Right, so Keith Pyatt, who was the waiter in this, who died only a couple of months after the broadcast of Fallout, so this was one of his last acting roles. He was Ortlock in the Aztecs.
Of course he was.
The nice high priest.
The nice Aztec, yeah.
In the Aztecs.
Of course he was.
And we got two more. One of them I don't expect you to get because he's in the missing episode of Missing Episodes. That is never
Feast of Stephen?
The Feast of Stephen, yes. It's never going to be found because it was never sold overseas.
It was never made in the first place.
Is that Peter Madden?
No, that's Norman Mitchell, who is the mechanic who comes to fix the lights after Number 12 sabotage them.
Yes.
He was the first policeman in the Feast of Stephen. So one of those scout policemen from the Z-Cars parody. So there's one more. There's one more to get. Another Hartnell appearance. Who makes a small appearance at the beginning of the episode? Did either of you spot him?
There are other people who weren't in Doctor Who that are interesting.
Well, we can talk about those in a moment, Steve.
All right, tell us about the other Doctor Who person because I don't know.
Michael Miller.
No? Michael Miller. Okay.
Who's the man in the buggy? So the guy who comes to take him to his lessons played Woolnoth in The Time Meddler. He's the guy who is the head of the village, whose wife is Edith. He's her village. He also appears apparently in A Change of Mind and Fallout, so we will be encountering him again in The Prisoner.
There's any number of people in this who should have been in Doctor Who.
That's the thing. Yeah. You look at it and you go, oh, that person should have been in, and then they weren't.
And they were in every ITC series. And,
yes.
They're very, very familiar faces. And you think, oh, surely Peter Swanick was in Doctor Who at some point. Surely he must have been, but no, he wasn't.
So who else stood out for you then?
Right. Well, okay. Well, there's a couple of names on the cast list. Robert Rietti, of course,
yes,
who is a voice, an uncredited voice, as he was in everything. Well, he was the voice of Dr. No in Dr. No. He revoiced Joseph Wiseman, and he was He did another Bond villain voice. Goldfinger. He was the voice of Goldfinger in Goldfinger. So he used to do lots of that sort of thing. Robert Rietti
Yes.
revoicings.
And one of our favourites, he revoiced Keith Ford in one episode of UFO.
Brilliant.
Michael and I will have talked about him at length.
He was the king of the non-singing revoices.
Yes,
but
in this, there's he's basically a couple of random people that are coming through the gate. He revoices them. Not his usual role as the generic number 2.
He's a very recognisable voice in his own right, actually.
Yeah.
You can usually tell when it's Robert Rietti.
Yeah.
The one that did jump out for me was Conrad Phillips. I mean, I've fairly recently rewatched the ITC swashbuckler series William Tell about the medieval Swiss freedom fighter, which was Conrad Phillips played the leading role. I mean, there were 2 of these ITC series that I remember out of all of them very clearly from watching in the 60s, which was The Adventures of Robin Hood and William Tell. I preferred Robin Hood. Conrad Phillips he was the leading man in that series, and here he plays the Doctor, which is a very, very small role, really. He doesn't get to do or say a great deal, and this is a leading man in British films in the 50s and in William Tell as well. There we are. So Conrad Phillips.
Yeah, and I mean it makes an impact, because I was watching him going, I'm pretty sure I've seen him somewhere else. I haven't seen William Tell, so clearly not. But he definitely, as you say, minor part, but holds his own in the scenes that he appears in.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he did all sorts of, as I say, films and things. He was well known. I'm just looking at his credits. I mean, the latest one on that IMDb have. He was in an episode of Never the Twain. I'm looking at Hannah, Emmerdale. He did some episodes of Emmerdale. Sorry. The William Tell remake in 1988, which was called Crossbow, he made a return in the role of Stefan, like a small role in a remake of William Tell, which is nice. He did a Howard's Way, Kenny Everett, Return of Sherlock Holmes, where he was in Into the Labyrinth, he was in Crib, Hammer House of Horror. There's any number of things he was in here. Crown Court, of course, everybody was in Crown Court. Yeah. So
Cool.
a career that went back. The earliest thing on IMDb is in 1955. So that's not long before William Tell.
Yeah.
There we are.
Cool. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, we last time, not last time. Yes, last time we recorded, I think we had, which will be in your future, listeners, we had George Coulouris. So we even had somebody who was in Citizen Kane being in The Prisoner, in a minor role. It is bizarre how The Prisoner has some of these.
Well, he does the same thing in Doctor Who, doesn't he, George Coulouris? It's a very small role, really, that he plays in The Keys of Marinus. But he had. See, I thought for years that he'd returned from the States, or he'd come from the States to Britain because he was one of the blacklisted actors, but apparently not. He just came and moved. I think he moved back to Britain. I think he's originally British, wasn't he?
I don't know.
I believe.
No, I think it was. I think most of the people in Citizen Kane were people that Wells had kind of worked with in his career. And he told everyone he'd made his film before he was 30. He was actually 31, but he was lying because he wanted to make everyone impressive. So he knocked a couple of years off to say that he could make it before 30. So these are people he'd worked with. Lots of people from the Mercury Theatre Company, and a lot of people he'd worked with, especially in Ireland and the stage there as well.
Yeah.
But
he did tend to make up quite a lot about his career, so you were never completely sure what was true and what wasn't.
The great line about Orson Welles is that he lived his career backwards, didn't he?
Yeah. Finishing off with the voiceovers in a cartoon. Yeah. That was his last major role in Transformers.
That's in the Sherry adverts, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to have you, Steve. Great
I've
guest
enjoyed that immensely.
as ever. And next week we are doing Many Happy Returns, which we have recorded already with Stephen Shapansky. So look forward to
guest. Excellent guest.
So listeners, look forward to that next week. But until then, it's goodbye from Steve.
Goodbye.
And I will say goodbye, and we leave the final word as ever to Michael.
Thanks very much, Steve, for being on number 3 this week. And until next time, be seeing you.
I knew somebody would say it.
And now for the spoilery bit. Because there's various ways of reading the show, and we've had, again, different responses from different characters.
Well, I started to say it, didn't I?
Yeah.
That the answer to The Prisoner is in those opening titles.
Mm.
Who are you? I am number 2. Who is number 1? You are number 6. The answer was there in plain sight all the time. But unfortunately, the different actors who played number 2, who said those words, weren't let in on that secret. So some of them say, you are number 6.
Yeah.
And some say, you are number 6. Yes. So they don't sell it right.